What does it mean to support a loved one suffering from mental illness or addiction without losing yourself? This is a tender topic today. But when does compassion turn into codependency, support become control, or care turn into overfunctioning?
Mental illness and addiction affect many families, if not most. You and your loved ones may be suffering silently, but you are not alone. As a caretaker, you might feel exhausted, confused, even resentful and heartbroken. Please join us as we focus on you and how to hold your loved one through the battles of mental illness and addiction without losing yourself.
Do you sometimes feel lost in your relationships, your identity, or even your spirituality? Welcome to Gilmore&green, where healing and hope meet.
We are marriage and family therapists and relationship experts who care deeply about helping you grow, strengthen your relationships, and deepen your sense of meaning and spirituality.
We long to share from our clinical experience, years of training and solid research, including ideas about how to strengthen the things that matter the most to all of us in life.
We're so glad you're here. Our hope is to share simple, meaningful ideas that support you in your healing and in your growth. Welcome to Gilmore&green, where healing and hope meet. Hi, I'm Dr. Debi Gilmore, a marriage and family therapist, and we want to talk about something that quietly touches so many families, often more than we realize, and often in silence. If you love someone who is struggling with mental illness or addiction, or if you're walking that road yourself, we hope that this will feel like a gentle place to land. Today is really about you, the one who cares, the one who shows up, who carries concern and love, sometimes without a lot of support or understanding. Our hope is that as we spend this time together, you'll feel a little more seen, a little less alone, and a little more compassion for them and for you. What does it mean to love someone who's struggling with mental illness or addiction? And how do we do this without losing ourselves?
I'm Sharilyn Green, also a marriage and family therapist, and someone who feels this deeply from my own personal experience. For those suffering with addiction or mental illness, we see you and the daily battle that you fight. You're some of our greatest heroes. At the same time, we see those who stand by supporting and helping in the very best ways that you know how. It's really difficult for all involved. So today we hope to speak directly to those of you who are loving someone in deep struggle. This could be a spouse, a child, a parent, or someone close to you. You may feel heartbroken, resentful, confused, especially exhausted, and maybe even invisible at times.
First, it's important for you to know that there is a way to love deeply and to support someone you care about without losing yourself in the process. In our clinical work, we see this so often and always with so much empathy. When you love someone who is struggling, it's natural to lean in, to try to help, to carry more. And sometimes without even realizing it, things can start to feel a little tangled. What begins as care can slowly turn into overfunctioning. What begins as support can start to feel like control. And what begins as compassion can quietly shift into something that feels more like codependency. If that resonates at all with you, you're not doing anything wrong. You're just responding out of love. We just want to gently help you find a way to stay connected to them while also staying connected to yourself.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that too, Debbie. It's not that you're doing something wrong. The intentions of this are so pure and so good. But we do want to start our conversation today off with a discussion on the difference between compassion and codependency. As we've said, codependency often comes from a very beautiful place. It comes from a place of compassion in people, but it can easily turn into unhealthy cycles and patterns where both people can get stuck if we're not careful. We love those who are suffering so much. We want to relieve their pain, of course, and help carry their burdens for them. But instead of being with someone in their pain, we can shift to try and take away their pain. And this can be the place where codependency can begin. So in the beginning, our compassion sounds like they're struggling and I want to help. But over time, it becomes they're struggling and it's my responsibility to fix it. And so codependency is born.
Codependency, it carries a negative connotation. It truly is unhealthy, but it's born out of compassion and not knowing what to do. So we fall into this unhealthy pattern. Unintentionally, we find ourselves pulled into a cycle we never meant to enter, where our nervous system starts organizing itself around their ability or their stability instead of our own. So we begin scanning with our brains without thinking about it. Are you okay? Are you upset? Did I say something wrong? How can I prevent the next spiral or cycle? And what started as compassion can slowly take on a different shape, covering for them, minimizing what's really happening, maybe walking on eggshells to avoid setting anything off or taking on responsibilities they're actually capable of, and offering reassurance again and again in ways that never quite seem to land. If you recognize yourself in any of this, it makes sense. This is what love can look like when we're trying so hard to hold everything together. It's also a place where we can begin to gently shift so you don't have to carry it all alone.
Yeah, we're talking about specific places today where this shift can happen, right? Addictions and mental illness. These are complicated spaces for everyone involved. And so, like you said, Debbie, it makes sense. These are some of the ways that we cope, all of us, with really difficult circumstances. There's so much we could say around the world of mental illness. The same with addiction. And so that's the place we're hoping to really focus on today as we talk about this difference between compassion and codependency. And so, in this process, maybe the saddest part of all, and what often happens, is people begin to abandon their own needs and what love feels like. And it locks into place a really unhealthy system, like you've described. One person starts to overmanage and overfunction, and that leaves the other person without having to fully face the impact of their behavior, or actually, really importantly, to have the space they need to grow in the ways that we need. We kind of fill that up for them. We come in and rescue in that space and leave no space for them to grow in the ways that they need. We always like to look at things through an attachment lens. And so, if we could do that right now, we would say through an attachment lens that this often comes from a longing that says, if I can just love you enough, you'll be okay and we'll be okay. Instead, the relationship now becomes organized around fear, hyper responsibility, hypersensitivity, ultimately, and finally, kind of an emotional exhaustion. So, wow, there's a lot going on here as we talk about this.
Yeah, and actually, when we do that, we're reinforcing a negative pattern. We're just, enabling this to continue. And we hate to see our loved ones suffer. So that's why we get stuck in these patterns. Over time, something else can begin to happen quietly, almost without noticing. The one who's been caring so much starts to disappear. You might feel resentment building in small, unexpected moments, a kind of emotional exhaustion that doesn't fully go away, a sense of losing parts of who you are, and sometimes a quiet loneliness, even while you're still in the relationship, surrounded by people. We want to say this gently, but very clearly. Codependency is not a failure to love. It is actually love. It's based on love without structure. And sustainable love needs both compassion and solid, healthy boundaries. So, how do we begin to shift this? Well, it takes courage. I'm going to put that in there first. The shift starts slowly. Instead of, I will fix this for you, it becomes, I will stand with you while you face this. It's a different kind of love, one that stays connected but doesn't take over. And maybe a gentle place to begin is with this question: where have I been carrying something that isn't mine to carry?
Yeah, again, going back to these specific places, we're talking about mental illness, addictions. I love that question. What have I been carrying that isn't mine to carry? It's just a great clarifying question. So, as we continue to kind of gently, carefully wade deeper into this conversation, Debbie, naturally this takes us into a discussion about boundaries the courage of boundaries. And it's one of the hardest and most misunderstood parts of loving someone through mental illness or addictions because boundaries, while there's so much connotation to that word, especially in our day, they're often seen as punishments, maybe, but in reality, what they are, their clarity, their love, like you said, with structure. I love that. They say, I care deeply about you, but I can't participate in a pattern that harms actually both of us. That's the important part. It harms us and it harms them. So boundaries really are true love. They really are.
Yes. And what we like to do at this point is warn you that there will be protests, that once we set those clear boundaries, that's what makes it hard to enforce them and to continue in a new direction because the protests make us feel guilty. So, as therapists, we know this can be especially hard when you begin to hold boundaries, that it can actually increase distress in the short term. You might be met with anger, withdrawal, or even, I'm going to say, and blame. And this is often the moment where people want to give in because it hurts to hold the line when someone you love is struggling. But this is where a different kind of clarity can begin to take shape. For example, I love you without becoming you. I can care deeply without carrying what isn't mine to carry. This kind of love may feel unfamiliar at first, but it's steady and it's grounded and it holds both connection and self respect. And we like to say, as therapists, if you love them, you will set boundaries. And over time, this is what begins to create a shift from a connection that feels fused and overwhelming, even suffocating, to one that is more secure, more balanced, and more sustainable for both of you.
Yeah, I love that you're talking about the reality of doing this. This is not easy, and especially depending on how long maybe you've been entrenched in some of these unhealthy patterns. It isn't easy to do this. We acknowledge that. We understand that, and so I'm glad you're talking about that, Debbie. I want to talk about how careful we need to be with something we call misplaced shame. There's a particular type of pain, especially in parents who have a child struggling, maybe especially with addiction, but also mental illness. There can often be an unspoken belief or fear that this is somehow my fault. That's really a painful, quiet place in parents. Our brains are wired to protect, to nurture, and to shape the lives of our children. And so when something goes wrong, it makes sense that our brain starts to immediately search for answers. And so instead of considering the complexities of genetics, environment, relationships, life experiences, all of those things that impact maybe what's happening, and it's complex, right? We tend to land on something much more painful. We may say quietly to ourselves or even to each other in even destructive ways, what did I miss? What did I do wrong? What did you do wrong? Even, what could we have done differently? There's this painful place of shame, around some of these places of mental illness and addiction that we wanted to gently talk about and how easy it can be to shift into those places without really looking at reality and how complex it is. So
It's a big assumption that it is ours to own. And so this is the regret that leads to shame and only fuels it. So we want to be careful about assigning a responsibility to ourselves. And what we're doing here, this is just the introduction to the education that's necessary to be able to launch into a healing process. The problem is those questions that you brought up. What did I miss? What did I do wrong? What could I have done differently? They don't actually bring clarity. It's that regret. It's looking at yesterday instead of looking at today going forward. Those questions pull you into self-blame and keep you feeling stuck. Because when shame takes over, it starts to shape how you respond. If it feels like it's your fault, of course, you're going to try to fix it. And that can look like giving more chances, softening consequences, stepping in when things fall apart, doing everything you can to prevent pain, which also prevents healing and the healthy patterns that we want to establish. So we're going to try to say this gently, but clearly this doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens because you feel responsible. And that makes sense, but it's also because you don't have enough knowledge and the education around this to be able to formulate a plan. So the hard part is that Without meaning to, you may end up protecting your child or your loved one from the very experiences that could lead to growth and change. And at the same time, you may begin to lose yourself, trying to fix something that was never yours to carry on your own.
And just to maybe gently keep exploring this place, especially in parents, we can do many things right and still have a child who struggles. I think every parent on the planet, at some point understands this, but it's not easy to separate that sometimes. But the work, I guess, for all of us as parents, when this stuff comes along, is learning to separate that I love my child deeply, but I'm not responsible for their choices. And boy, we want to suggest that mental illness is a choice or even addiction either. This is complicated. We can say, I won't abandon you, but also I won't abandon myself trying to save you either. We can say, I will stand with you in truth while not shielding you from reality. We can learn to release the illusion of control without releasing love. So, again, as we tenderly talk about parental responses in some of these places that are very complex, some of it based on choices, some of it on so many other factors that just have to be considered. Yeah.
Yeah, and as we consider the science that has examined for years and years the recovery process, there's a very important element of recovery, which is the faith perspective. So many people who have battled addictions or mental health have said that their faith is what sustained them. So, if it feels right to you, we want to offer a gentle invitation to look at this through a faith lens. There are places in this journey where we may need to release what we can't control, what we cannot fix, what was never ours to carry alone. And in those spaces, we can trust that God is present and that He will pick up the slack, even in the places we cannot reach, especially in those places. So sometimes one of the most loving things we can do is to place the person we love back into His hands, God's hands, not as a way of stepping away, but as a way of remembering we were never meant to do this alone. It's just not possible, and it's not meant to be an alone process. As you continue to care for them, you can also begin to care for yourself with your faith, loving in ways that are steady, grounded, and healthy for both of you. And I do want to suggest that faith, there's many pillars in this recovery process. We talked briefly a minute ago about education. It's important to get an education and understanding about the addiction and mental health process, but also holding on to your faith and spirituality that can sustain you through this process and give you strength that you would not otherwise find. Support. You've got to seek support, and that means from experts, a therapist. Maybe it's a group that will help you walk this process of recovery to the healing that you so long for. But always looking for these different pillars is so helpful. This is just an introduction, but really, this is mostly about you being able to remain connected and loving the one that is suffering without guilt or shame, that's displaced, that is not appropriate to assume the responsibility on you. So therefore, what? I think, Sharilyn, this is one of the most difficult things we deal with when it comes to relationships, is watching the otherwise healthy one assume the responsibility. And so I think that therefore what for me is to be especially compassionate and to help those that are stuck in codependency to understand what's really going on, to help them find the right kind of support.
Yeah, I love that, Debbie, and I'm just so glad that we've talked about this today. It is a really complex place for a lot of people, and it is so easy to lose yourself. We hope that we wanted this to be about you, the caregiver, maybe the one that stands by someone who is suffering with an addiction or a mental illness. I mean, it's a big topic. This is just a tiny sliver of it. But my therefore what I think is maybe greater clarity for me on the difference between codependency and compassion, how closely related they are, but there's a subtle shift where it turns into kind of a shadow side. And so I think just to look at the world in general with the right lenses on, what is the difference between, to be watchful of that in my own life, to be compassionate of that in others that I see in these places where it can shift into something really unhealthy where people lose themselves and we don't leave the space needed for our loved ones to grow and to change in the ways that they're capable of and need so much. So this has been a really, really important conversation today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. We really appreciate our listeners and hope that you will continue to follow us and send us ideas for topics that you are interested in. And thank you for joining us today.
For everyone.